Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed and YouTube channel. I am Maxwell Baumbach, and I'm joined, as always, by the real star of the show, Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, how are you doing today?
Maxwell, I'm doing awesome, dude. Busy weekend, but
Yeah.
very fulfilling. Had the mother-in-law in town, so
Nice.
that has been fun. I love making sure that everybody needs everything that they could ever need, like at any given moment. So I finally get to relax. She left today, so been watching a lot of basketball, man. Been writing about a lot of basketball, and I'm ready to talk about a lot of basketball.
For sure.
You, man. How's your weekend been?
It's been a weekend. It's been a week or so around here. We had to get our refrigerator replaced. We had a fence fall over. It's been a lot going on. So shout out to the wife for getting through all of it and doing stuff with a little one right now. Couldn't do any of this.
Shout out to all of the wives.
Yes, yeah. Mrs. Board's MVP of the team this weekend. Owe her quite a bit. So super glad that she's here. But let's get down to basketball business. The NBA Combine was this past week. Unfortunately, while we didn't get into the event, we were allowed to be in the general Chicagoland area. Can't keep us out of there. So we
there you go.
Yeah, got to meet up with a lot of really smart people, pick some brains, and have a good time. And of course, because the NBA Combine is over, we are going to spend the next hour and a half talking about Bronny James.
Yes!
I'm just kidding. There's plenty of that out there elsewhere. That will be the last mention of Bronny on this podcast. We want to talk about the stay or go decisions in this draft because there's always a lot of stay or goes, but like this year, it's really fascinating. Like I feel like we've talked all year about this being like an eye of the beholder kind of draft where it's like some teams might just try and like get their guy and whatever. And now we've got a situation where I feel like coming out of the combine, it's the same thing. Like we didn't get that Jalen Williams dominance. We didn't get Brandon Podziemski's like kind of ahead of the curve. Like we didn't, you know what I mean? Like it's pretty tight. Like I would say Shireman was like a step between. He was like between like what Paz did last year and what Ben Shepherd did last year for me.
Yeah,
like,
I'd say so.
A guy where I was like, that was really solid. That's clearly a pro. But I feel like otherwise it's. Man, we are still in a confusing predicament. Let's start off with a guy that we just got a nice hi, Dad, from Morgan. Shout out if she came through on the stream. A guy that I have been really surprised by, and we've talked about a lot internally, which is JT Toppin at New Mexico. So JT was one of those guys that declared himself eligible for the draft and did the transfer portal thing. He gets the invite directly to the combine. And it's one of those things where his name hasn't come up a ton as a this year prospect. But you think about it, and it's like, yeah, if he was in the draft this year, a guy listed at 6'9" that can defend every position and maybe shoot a little bit and is super effective as an interior finisher and rebounds that kind of the ball. Like, yeah, that's actually a guy that would be interesting. I thought he was tremendous this week. And I think that coming into the week, he would have been a guy that I assumed would just like test, show his face, have a good time and call it a weekend. Now I'm not so sure. I think there's a real case for him as a 2024 guy. But Stephen, where were you at with JT Toppin coming into the week, and where are you coming out?
Yeah, kind of similar thought as you, Maxwell, where I think that JT, obviously freshman, very athletic, kind of high-rising big man, very fun watch coming out of New Mexico. A guy that kind of popped on me when I'm kind of like doing these watch lists and stuff like that. I know I sent a few names out to you and like Corey and some other folks outside of No Ceilings as well. I'm kind of doing these queries of players, and JT was one of these guys that popped early to me. And every time I watch him, I'm just like, okay, he is not like the traditional size big man. You could see him kind of playing a little bit of like maybe Kenneth Faried, small ball 5, playing off of somebody else. Didn't really think that whenever I left and came back that he was going to be a name that would rise into considerable draft conversations, but definitely a guy you want to keep on a watch list, maybe have like a breakout sophomore season should he come back and play for New Mexico or potentially go somewhere else. And as this process has gone on, dude, like he has kind of proven himself to be a real commodity, not just like a nice, fun name that you want to keep on a watch list, like a legit NBA draft prospect already. And what we saw in the combine process, I know that he isn't really 6'9". A lot of these guys have like these wrestler heights listed where, Undertaker is listed at 6'10". He's probably like 6'8". JT Toppin, kind of the same thing without shoes, according to the NBA website. He's 6'7" without shoes. Incredible wingspan, though,
Yep.
slightly over 7-foot wingspan, which is what kind of allows him to feel like he might be that 6'9", 6'10" type prospect, and weighed in at about 221 pounds. So a guy who is a super athletic, kind of like multifaceted, kind of hybrid post forward big type player. And in the combine, dude, like he didn't really take over any of these games. Like none of these prospects really did, like how you mentioned earlier. But I think that he showed enough to where could you imagine him maybe being like, I know this is going to be like the lame comparison, but like
Yeah,
he
yeah.
had a very similar game to Obi Toppin, like
Sure, yeah.
gets out in the open court, highlight reel dunks, shows a little bit of flash of shooting game, crashes the glass, is just a high effort, high intensity guy. I think that he did a really good job of potentially securing a maybe upper to mid second round draft. I don't think that that's out of the question, but I don't know. With that being said, Maxwell, like I know next year's class is supposed to be, the draft class to wreck all draft classes.
Yeah,
I don't know if like he comes back and could be a mid to late first round guy. That's kind of the decision that I think that he has to weigh moving forward.
For sure. I'd imagine NIL will probably be a factor for him, being a guy that's
Absolutely.
in the portal. And just like I was like looking at the bigs that were in the portal the other day, and like it's dried up quite a bit. So it's also one of those things that like if I'm a team that needs a post player, I don't have many choices. I think with the Obi comparison, like the one thing that would have me so optimistic about JT long term is just like the mobility, like the hip movement, the foot speed.
Yes.
That's like that's not there for Obi. Now Obi is like an incredibly skilled offensive player, like the passing and kind of stuff that Obi was showing at Dayton hasn't really showed up on the tape for JT at New Mexico yet. But yeah, you mentioned the measurements, like measured short but long, which is like okay, like you can live with that. In the scrimmages, he was like a guy that you couldn't help but notice. Like wasn't the most efficient in the first game, 11 points on 11 shots, but 1 for 2 from 3, 10 boards all over the glass, like moving like a real deal NBA guy out there. And then I believe it was the second game where he looked like really good.
I believe you're right. I think it was the second game. What stood out to me about the
10
second
points. Yeah, 10 points, 2 for 2 from 3. Again, 7 boards and 2 steals in that one.
What stood out to me in that game in particular, Maxwell, I'm sorry to cut you off, is that he did well, in my opinion, going out on the perimeter and guarding some of these other kind of like tweener forward type guys. And I think that probably helped his draft stock out a lot, is him being able to step out on the perimeter, because we didn't really get to see a whole lot of that at New Mexico. You know what I mean? Where like not every college, program has these 2 or 3 guys out on the perimeter that can do a little bit with the basketball in their hands. So he was kind of more relegated to the stationary, less mobile front court players. And what we saw this in that game in particular was him stepping out to the 3-point line, guarding, kind of using his footwork a little bit. Still a lot of room to improve in that regard, but it was encouraging to see him go out there and be pretty competent out there along the perimeter defending.
Yeah. So I think like looking at his game, there's quite a bit that I like feel confident in scaling up. Like I feel confident about his ability to move. This is a really good point from Dirty Dancer. All these 6'9" lengthy guys from small schools feel like the same prospect to me this year. I think that's reasonable, but I think that is like almost a feather in the cap of JT Toppin, that I don't think he was considered in that same vicinity prior to this week. And I thought he did himself a lot of favors by getting there. I think like the rebounding is going to translate. He's like an outstanding finisher, and like he's above the rim. He's strong through contact. I think one of my favorite things about him, especially if the shot comes along, is like I talked about this with PJ Hall early in the year, but it's true for Toppin, is he could really become a dynamic screener because he's strong. He's going to make contact on it. He's going to be really quick when he does decide to slip to the rim. Potent roll man, obviously you can toss him lobs all day, but if the jump shot gets there, like that's a real tough pick and roll to kind of guard. And I also thought his decision making with the ball was like pretty good in this game. At New Mexico, they had Jamal Mashburn Jr., who likes to shoot every time he touches the ball. They had Jalen House, who's a guard. They had Donovan Dent, who's like a great playmaker. Toppin had this really low assist rate. Like he had this like 4.1 assist rate. But it was one of those things where it's like, I don't have any notes about him being like a poor decision maker. Like it was just the role that he played. He didn't really get the ball. So that would be like a thing I would be really interested in this. If I'm a team, I'm trying to get this guy in for a workout ASAP, to see like what he looks like. If I just like put him in some sort of 3-on-3, like short roll style drill, just to see like what kind of decisions he can make, or what does he look like in a 3-on-2, 2-on-1 kind of drill? Like, what does he look like in these settings where he has to make quick decisions with the ball? Because if he has that, like, we've kind of like made fun of like the pre-draft concept at times, because like the results on it, like no team really ever fully like bought into that concept. But I could see myself as a team thinking like, well, if I've got something here with a dude that's 6'9" and can defend and like has some shooting upside and plays with a crazy motor, like maybe I do promise that guy. Like maybe I just say like, hey, I know like a lot of NIL money might be on the table, but like, how would you feel about coming in here on a second round deal? Like I would really consider that, depending on how the shot looks up close and how the decision making looks.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, right now on my screen, kind of in the background, no one else could see it. I have the playoffs going on, just so I can kind of peek over and see what's going on. And shout out to all the sickos in the chat. Know that there's the second Game 7 on today, so the fact that y'all are here hanging out with us, it's pretty remarkable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but what I'm seeing in these playoffs, Maxwell, is that rebounding is at a premium, and rebounding and strength. There's two factors that I feel like you and I, we kind of continuously will touch up on, like maybe like every other show, maybe every third show, we bring up at least one of these factors that prospects have to have in the game. And JT does that. You know, he crashes the board, these high energy bigs, the role players that rebound, especially come, you know, postseason time frame. You can't really go wrong by taking one of those types of players. You know what I mean? So I think that JT, in the midst of everyone together, and, you know, Maxwell, let me turn this to you real quick.
Sure.
One thing that people have been saying, and there's a lot of truth to it, is that these scrimmages within the combines, they're set up to allow guards to kind of take over the game, and particularly scoring. You know, shout out to Boogie Ellis, right? But I think that there are certain elements of other positions game that you really need to pay attention to. It might not be the scoring, but again, what JT was able to do in terms of like that versatility on the defensive side of the ball and the rebounding, I think that those are open for anybody to have. So when you have all these prospects together that they didn't get to skip, right? Like they weren't like the top 10 or the top 15 prospects that all the teams wanted to see. These are kind of the others. If you're able to go throw your name into a pool of those types of players and you're able to kind of, you know, outgrit and outwork them a little bit, teams are going to really kind of be drawn to players like that. So I think that JT is in a good position because of how he performed throughout the rest of the season, improved in some of these areas throughout the season, but getting in this setting and looking poised, looking unrattled, unshaken, and ready for the moment, and succeeding in the areas that he did, man. Like, I couldn't blame a team if they fell in love with him. I couldn't blame him if he is like, you know what, like next season, who knows what the draft class is going to do. I've already received a couple promises. Some teams are already letting me know that they're interested. I'm going to stay in.
Yeah, I think it's much more reasonable now than it was before. I was doing a pod with Presidente from the Strickland the other day, and like one of the things we were talking about are like, what are the things you can get better at in the G League? And I think one of them is shooting. So like, if the shooting is a concern for you, like I do think that's something that like we've seen a guy, like if you look at like what Jordan Walsh did in the G League this year, like Walsh was a guy who was a poor shooter in college on like low-ish volume relative to his position. And then this year in the G, I think he shot like 38-ish% on like 5 a game off the top of my head. Like don't have the numbers in front of me, but like I think that is one of those things you can rep out. Now, Toppin was a poor free throw shooter. He's like a 56% free throw shooter. Yeah. So if you're skeptical of that at the same time, I would understand. And then I don't know how much better the passing is going to get if you're worried about that. So it's interesting. He's an interesting like draft philosophy case, and he'd be a guy I'd really want to be bringing in. Let's do anything else on Toppin real quick before we hop over to our next guy.
No, I think we're good to go ahead and talk about the next prospect.
Let's do Alex Karaban. So Karaban was interesting. I feel like I kind of liked Karaban a little bit more than a lot of other people did throughout the year, just because like he is really strong. I always was bothered by his like foot speed in space. but I thought that he used his body and his strength really well. Like, again, we're talking about strength and just how important it is.
Yes.
I also thought he was like one of those guys that had another like different type of screening versatility. Where I think he's a guy that could potentially come off screens and shoot, even though he wasn't great at it this year, but also be a guy who sets screens and then like pick and pops and whatever. Like, comfortable pulling up in shooting it in transition, whatever. But just like a nice, like power driving downhill game as well. A guy who makes smart decisions with the ball. Really nice, like weird second jump on the offensive glass.
Yeah.
Defense has always been like solid from a playmaking metric standpoint. But on a UConn team with Klingon and Castle, and then you've got Cam Spencer, Tristan Newton, more on the margins. Like Karaban sort of flew under the radar to an extent and wasn't a guy that I think got a lot of like, I don't want to say scrutiny, but I guess individualized attention throughout the year. Combine athletic testing wasn't great, but he did
not at all.
Pretty rough. Measured in at 6'6.5", but 6'11" wingspan. Like another guy who's like 220 pounds. So like the weight is there. One like not so good scrimmage and then one good scrimmage from him. But like plays a position that people really value and has a level of feel. Did Karaban move one way or another for you, and kind of where were you with him? Because he's been like late first, early second for me, and I'll kind of get to where I have him now in a second.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the same ballpark as you, where he didn't really blow me away throughout the season, but he was such a consistent, steady present. He's like a gnat in your eye almost, where like you can't like, come on, like leave me alone. I'm trying to forget that you exist, right? But he's just kind of proven to be undeniable. He measured in well. I think without shoes, he was like 6'6", almost 6'7", 6'11" wingspan, almost 220 pounds. So pretty well put together guy, even though he didn't test well athletically. He's constantly moving on the floor, right? So it's kind of one of those things where he's almost like a European player, where it's like he's not rocked up, cut up, or anything like that, right? But he is he's constantly moving, kind of corn-fed strong in a sense, right? Not a lot of definition, but hard to move off his line or anything like that. I have him in the early second, but in the most recent mock draft that we did for No Ceilings, I get to teams like Denver, and I'm just like, this guy is just like, why would he not succeed in a system like that where they run multiple cuts off of the big man? And, some of these cuts, the big man, or excuse me, like the wing player will come off of like the strong side wing and set a flare screen on the opposite side for another wing to either pop out behind the 3-point line or to make a cut to the basket. And I see the system that UConn employs and how that contributes to winning. And I see, like I said, I'm glancing over on the Nuggets right now, and I can see some of the plays that they run. And I see Alex Karaban succeeding. He's got that, he's strong build, good size. People get kind of bent out of shape a little bit about the mechanics, but mechanics kind of make sense for some players, but some people kind of transcend, form and things like that. You know what I mean? And even though it's like, there's a little bit of like wasted movement on the shot, it's not slow. You know what I mean? And if you look at the shot grouping, if you were to like look at it in terms of like shooting like targets and stuff like that, the grouping of the shots are pretty tight, right? So the combine didn't really do much to sway me. I think that some people might get bent out of shape that there were some big men that moved better than he did on like these cone drills and stuff like that. But when you go back and watch tape, and some of the combine measurements actually force us to go back and look at tape, you go and look and see how he moves in relation to, other players on the floor. He's not like crazy slow or anything like that. He's not like moving at like negative 0.5 speed or anything. And he shoots well. He's big. He's strong. He rebounds. He competes. He does a lot of winning stuff. I'm not really moved in a negative manner because of the combine for Karaban, because I don't think that it was ever really the type of system that he was going to go and like take over, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, the athletic testing didn't really bug me with him, because it's like, I think there's guys where they're going to test poorly, and then how it manifests itself on the court is like a different thing. And like I didn't think, and I'd have to watch like back with an eye on just him to like more definitively say this, but I thought he looked fine out there. Like I at no point was I like, oh no, Alex Karaban, what's happening? He did leave a bunch of shots short in the first game, and I was wondering if that's like maybe a kink of the mechanics, if like it does affect like having that unnecessary movement at the very top, like prior to the release. Does that affect how much you can put on the ball? I don't know. But yeah, I thought like defensively he was fine, which is like where I'd worried about him a little bit. I think he's a guy that has one of the more interesting decisions just on the basis of like UConn is going to be good. They are going to have a lot of talent. I don't know how much bigger of a role he can get. And like I don't see him as a guy like I think the way he plays as opposed to the way that somebody like Shireman or like Tucker DeVries is going to get to play next year is going to be different.
Yeah.
Like, he's not going to cook with the ball in his hands. Like he's always going to be sort of tertiary. Like I don't know if I'm like looking at this from like an agent perspective. Like I don't know how much more he could help his stock if he goes back. And like that's his perspective too, is like, am I going to make more money, you know, here or there? Like I don't know that he's going to do much to move the needle. I don't think it would hurt if he wanted to take like one more year to like work on his athleticism a little bit or like play with the shot mechanics a little. But I thought he was really fine. Like I don't think this was a bad week for him. I thought the second game he looked quite a bit better. But real solid. But if you were saying if you're advising Karaban, like do you say stay or go?
It's tricky. I would probably lean towards the go because of the amount of wings and forwards that are going to be coming into this next year's draft cycle, and the ones that have already said, no, I'm going to come back. And you know, like just by the nature of the beast, that there's going to be some risers that come up that no one's really even calculating into their analysis right now. I would say go. If he came back, I wouldn't really be bent out of shape about it. He could do something similar to where like Peyton Sanford out of Iowa went from being a sixth man to a starter. Karaban starts, right, but he could go from being like fifth starter to third or second, same amount of usage, but maybe gets a little bit more looks, right? So, or maybe just converts a little bit better. Who knows, right? But I think that he's in a sweet spot to where he could kind of pick whichever one he wanted to do, and neither one of them would negatively impact his NBA future. You know what I mean? And I think he's kind of like peaked out in terms of like what he's going to get out of college basketball, but I don't think that he's going to do anything that could like take steps in the wrong direction should he go back, if that makes sense.
I would agree. I think like he's got a pretty safe floor. So I think you just like evaluate almost purely like how much money will I make next year here versus there. Cause I think, like it's always going to be a position of value. And I think because he's not just a shooter, his floor is a little safer than like if like other guys that we'll talk about like in our lightning round later.
He rebounds,
like plays defense
back, too.
Like if they go back, like it's really important that they like stay shooting. And I think Karaban could like survive a bit of a dip just because he does so much on the court.
For sure.
I've had him like 30s range all year. So
same.
I think either one is like reasonable. Like I don't think he can really make a bad choice here.
I think it could be one of those things though, where like since the draft order is set, if we know that Denver's picking at like 28, like I could definitely see like the draft order helping his stock more than anything else that he could necessarily do for himself, if that makes sense.
I would agree too. And I even wonder too, if a team like Utah that's got like that late first pick too, where it's like, do they just desperately need wing size guys? And maybe they're like, let's take one that's just like not a project. Like let's take one that like we know we could kind of throw out there. Like,
does Minnesota want a shooter? Does Boston want another big wing white shooter? You know, like there's a bunch of different teams at the tail end of the first round that 6'7", 6'8" and shooter. Yeah, like that could. I think that, again, the draft order could definitely impact where he falls on big boards.
For sure. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to talk about some really interesting defensive prospects. So stay with us. We'll be back on the other side. All right, let's kick it off with Florida State's Jamir Watkins. So I thought he was a guy who could have potentially like had a really big week And like he was fine. Like just another one of these guys that like came into the week and it's like, oh man, like if he has a big week, like watch out, this could be a guy who really climbs. And then like wasn't, necessarily one thing or another. Like he was just all right. In his second scrimmage game, he looked quite a bit better. He was 2 for 4 from 3, had 4 rebounds, 4 assists, like really showed some of the offensive stuff that like, oh yeah, like this is what it looks like if it's actualized. I've kind of liked Jamir Watkins a lot more than I think the consensus throughout this year, but where are you at with Jamir Watkins? Oh, do we lose?
I think.
Oh, you're good. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know which one happened. I didn't know if I lost you or you lost me.
All right, we're good. So yeah, so where are you at with Jamir Watkins, who I thought had a really nice second scrimmage?
Yeah, I didn't go into the combine thinking super duper highly of Jamir, and it's not like he's a bad player. He's kind of like early to mid second for me, where I know some teams are a little bit more. I know that some people are a little bit more high on him, and because he was where he was on my board coming in, kind of in like that like mid to late 30s, early 40s range, I really wasn't blown away. Like I kind of saw the same things that I expect. Like I kind of saw what I expected to see, and it wasn't great, right? Like he was actually a little smaller in the measurements that I anticipated. 6'5" without shoes. Did have a good wingspan, almost 6'11", and pretty sturdy guy. I was kind of hoping to see a little bit more defensive intensity because that's kind of like the calling card with Jamir is like going to be a strong defender, a connective offensive guy. I felt like I saw more of the connective offensive stuff, but not enough of the defense. And that kind of led me to believe like kind of okay with taking this guy in the second round right now. I don't necessarily feel like he's going to be a guy that I have to have in the first. And I wanted that to be the case. I wanted Jamir to come in and kind of like take the combine a little bit more by force. And it didn't happen. And with that being the case, I'm still kind of left in the same spot with him where I kind of hope he does go back, right? Like I want him to go back and be a little bit more of a scoring, a consistent scoring option, continue to show that strong defensive presence. I'm not really swayed. I'm not compelled to where I'm like, oh man, am I overthinking it? Is Jamir really a first round guy kind of hiding in plain sight? He didn't really answer any of those questions for me.
So I think Jamir should go. So he's going to be 23 shortly after the draft. I also think he is one of those guys where, like we just talked about with Karaban, like Karaban could survive like a spottier shooting year. I don't think Jamir can. No. And like so he shot the best percentage of his career from 3 as a leading option at Florida State. Like Jamir, let's dig into the trajectory with Jamir because it's interesting. Plays at VCU as like an energy defender freshman. Solid season. Nothing to write home about. Tears his ACL. Comes back as a sophomore. Takes on a bit of a bigger role. Does a little bit better in that role. And then transfers up to Florida State and has an outstanding season. Like the best of his career. Basically like the highest usage starter on that team. I don't think he was the highest usage guy overall because Primo Spears came off the bench and shot 45 times per minute. But Jamir, like highest usage starter, still put up awesome counting numbers defensively. 3.8 steal percentage, 3.2 block percentage, was an outstanding isolation defender during his time at VCU. Yep. Like not one of these guys that's like, oh, like he just kind of like hunts stats and gambles. Like he can really lock guys down on the ball too. Good rebounder for his position, good passer for his position. I'm a little bit worried about like what the playmaking looks like in a lesser role because it is a lot of like dribble, run a ball screen. Like I don't know, like his connective passing isn't as obvious as the connective passing of a player like Kaysen Wallace last year.
Sure.
Where it was like we saw Kaysen just like make those quick swings that it's like, oh yeah, he's gonna be able to do that. Like that's not something Jamir did because that's not how Florida State played. It doesn't mean it's not in there. But I see a guy who really just needs to get better at like playing off of the ball and shooting threes. And like that stuff I think he can do in the G if he does go in the draft this year. I also love how much he hits the free throw line. He's not like a good finisher for his position, but Florida State's spacing is so horrible that like I wonder if he's maybe a little bit better at that than we realized. He still got better at it, even though he wasn't good. But he gets to the line a ton, like drives with a lot of ferocity. Like I just see a guy that rebounds, defends multiple positions extremely well. Clearly has like some level of basketball feel. Like there's a reason that they let him operate with the ball in his hands so much. And like the shot is getting better year over year, even with an ACL tear in the mix. Like if it comes together, the value proposition is awesome. Like if you get him like late first, early second, and then all of a sudden he is shooting threes and he's a guy who can dribble, get to the line, make passes, shoot open shots, and be like a force on defense. Like I love that. Like I still really like Jamir a lot in that sort of range.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's like a few similar prospects of that same archetype, like a Kevin McCullough or Dylan Jones, who have proven to be a little bit more, I would say, connective or reliable on the defensive end, probably even a little bit stronger too. And again, that's kind of like where I am with Jamir. And, I don't know how much stock people put into combine games, but again, I wasn't blown away by the defense. I thought it was fine.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to have seen him be a little bit more assertive, be a little bit more of that dog-like defender that I think a lot of people are projecting him to be in the NBA. And again, I didn't have that feeling coming in. Combine certainly didn't help that.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit more confident in the offense than I did coming in. I get the idea of him. I get the theory to him, and Florida State prospects always kind of rub me the wrong way because I feel like if you know that you're not a good offensive player but a good defender, that's the school where you want to go to. Like to play there. It's like, okay, what about the offense? So you get your exceptions like your Scotty Barnes and stuff like that, right? But it usually says a lot to me whenever you get these players who want to go and play for Florida State. It's like, okay, how bad is your offense, bud? You know what I mean? So
it's a great place if you can like dribble but not shoot. Like it's like if you are Raekwon Gray, like there is no better place to go. I don't blame you.
Can we get to some things real quick that's going on in the chat real quick?
Sure.
D. Stevens asked, do y'all think Jamir's defense is more theoretical, or does a 3.5 block percentage guarantee he'll be a good defender? I don't know how you feel about that, Maxwell.
I like buy the defense a lot with Jamir. I think that sort of block rate paired with that type of usage is like a pretty awesome combination. Like we're talking about a guy who had a 27.6 usage rate. I don't think I think it's always best to be careful about like guaranteeing that somebody will be a good defender. But I would say if you look at guys who play his like sort of forward position, a 3-point, like a block and steal rate over 3 is like real nice. Like it's not something you see particularly often. And I think doing that with his offensive workload, like I think he's a much better bet to be a good defender than most guys in this class. I just think it's a matter of like, is he going to shoot it at all? Because like if he's 32%, it's just like, I don't know what you do with that. Like, especially because of like the rim finishing issues. Like there's worlds where it gets like real dicey really quick for him and it doesn't happen, especially because we're talking about a guy who's going to turn 23 right after the draft, which is like a big part of the reason for me that I would say go in now, because like there's just not a lot of margin for error and you got to figure this out pretty soon.
That's fair. And I'm going to steal a page from the Tyler's podcast. Yeah,
go for it.
They do. A little would you rather have. And I just did film dive on both of these dudes recently. So would you rather have Jamir Watkins or Isaiah Crawford?
My brain says Crawford and like my heart says Watkins. Like I think Watkins is just like a little bit better of a mover. I think Crawford's like the safer pick. But I kind of want to go with Jamir just because like I'm a little more tantalized by the athleticism.
I have Jamir ranked higher on my board, and I kind of had like this preconceived notion of where Isaiah was athletically, but going back and looking on the film, he's a little bit better mover than what like my mind's eye remembered. I don't know, man. Like I might mess around and have Isaiah a little bit higher on my board after deep diving on him.
Completely reasonable. Yeah. I think with Isaiah, you're getting a little bit more bulk. You're not dealing with the finishing questions. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. I
Okay.
think like what I like about Watkins is I like the areas of the court he operates in a little bit more. Like I like that he's a little bit more perimeter oriented, like spot up attacking, where like Crawford spent a little bit more time in the mid range. Like I like that about Watkins.
Yeah, back to the basket, run around me type thing. I got you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really fun one though. Let's move to our next guy, Jonathan Mogbo, who, boy oh boy, like what an interesting year for this guy. So this is one of those like late bloomer type guys. Extremely interesting player in that mold. So he was like 5'11" or something like that, like had this huge growth spurt, went from Independence Community College to Northeastern Oklahoma A&M, and then Missouri State. Is like fine at Missouri State, and then like transfers to San Fran, and all of a sudden like is a dude. Like 14.2 points per game, 10.1 boards, 3.6 assists to 1.8 turnovers. Like anytime you're dealing with like a guy that big that has like that sort of like assist to turnover, that's always really interesting. Good steal and block rates as well. 3.2 steal rate, 3.5 block rate. The good and bad of the scoring profile is that he's an outstanding finisher and was like, I believe, near the top of the dunks leaderboard. Like really, really good.
Yes.
The issue is he does not shoot. Like 69% free throw shooter. Like if you didn't watch San Francisco, but you watched some Marquette, like there's some overlap with him and Oso Ighodaro as far as like if you play off him around the elbow, like he's a little more likely to take that shot, but it doesn't look good. Which is like odd because like you would think like this late bloomer who was a guard, like maybe that would be something that's there. We haven't seen it yet. But just like this bizarre hyper productive play style. Measured a little short, 6'6" and a quarter. So very short positionally. 217.2, which isn't ideal. But the wingspan is big time. 7'2" wingspan, standing reach over 9 foot, which is great. I don't recall the athletic testing for him, so I'm assuming it was just like good.
Nothing stood out to me as far as like the testing numbers or anything that were striking. Yeah.
And then in the scrimmages, like he was really good. Both games, like he came out of the gate really hot too, which I think matters. Like because I think sometimes like scouts can like doze off a little bit in some of these games, and like he just came out of the gate immediately like doing stuff. Had a bunch of assists in both games, a lot of transition play, like a lot of just like grab and go, lead the break, get the team into early offense sort of stuff. So the game he had 4 points, 6 boards, 4 assists, and a steal, getting those numbers on that second game momentarily as well. But both games, like just a lot of grab and go and general productivity, which has been the thing he's done. How did you feel about his combine experience and where are you at with him as it stands?
Yeah, I came into the year, the scouting community late again because of the nature of my job. And this is one of these guys where I leave and I come back and all of a sudden I keep hearing about Mogbo. And, Maxwell, you and I both pride ourselves on the depths within, the prospects that we cover from all over. And Mogbo wasn't a guy on my radar coming into the year. I mean, I think that's fair for most people to just kind of feel that way. And when I was hearing about him, I was like, okay, he's nice. And the more I watched him, the higher he's creeping up my board. I didn't just thrust him up there because he was a buzzing name. Now I kind of had him in the like mid to late 40s, early 50s range. But man, just watching him in the combine, coming in hot, like you said, constant activity, nonstop motor, measured in at 6'6.25 inches, 7'2" wingspan, a little over 217 pounds. I don't even really know what to classify this guy as, right?
It's
like
bizarre. He's just a basketball player.
Is he a forward? He's got good wing skills. I would say he's probably a 4 in my mind's eye right now. And again, everything that we were saying earlier with JT Toppin, I feel like that's, back to Dirty Dancer's point earlier, kind of copy and paste a lot of the same, pros that he has. Some of the cons, the similar size, similar wingspan, similar motor and productivity. But the thing that he has going for him is that live action playmaking, right? And I don't know how important that's going to be though to the NBA. You know, it's one of those things where it's a unique skill that only he has for his position, really.
Mm-hmm.
But how much are NBA teams going to invest into that? You know what I mean? So it's like how marketable is that grab and go ability that he has? I mean, it's nice to have, but I don't know how many teams are looking at that and saying we can plug him in our system and really use this. You know what I'm saying?
He's like fascinating to me for that reason, because like I generally love like guys that are overwhelmingly productive and guys that like I always talk about like the value of like just not having an easily replicable skill set. Like that's like a big part of the Neat Clifford sell for me, is that like there's just not a lot of guys that like do this particular brand of stuff. My gripe with Mogbo is like still the same. Like this is still a guy that does not shoot, which like for his size is a problem. There's like a million guys that like you can sell. It's like, well, like he's a 4, but like you if you play him with a stretch 5, like this will all click. And like that to me is just like not a sell that I love. Like I have a really hard time with that, like as a sales pitch in general. I thought he really struggled against like larger players this year, like in the games against like Gonzaga and teams like that. You look at his productivity, he had a 10.5 BPM on the year. But against top 50 teams, he had 7 games, 5.8 BPM. Didn't shoot as well from the field in those games, didn't get as many blocks or steals in those games, like still rebounded pretty well, but like just had a really hard time scoring efficiently, because similar to Oso Gadaro, like when you're that size and you don't have overwhelming strength, it can be hard to get really close to the basket. And when he's not really close to the basket, he can't score. So I just struggle a bit with him. I also like on a more charitable note, like I think that there could be some upside if you tell me like if you put him with a better guard, it might look different. Like Sharaf Jamps found him a lot for lobs, but like Marcus Williams, who was their other guard, like really missed the mark on some of those passes to him a lot. Like the dunk numbers could have almost been better if he had like a true blue 1 on his team. I thought like the one interesting kind of question that I came out with was he was good at the stuff I thought he would be good at. He was good at like grabbing, going, leading the break. He hit a Euro step in transition.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive.
Wonder, like, is there a world where I am misassessing what the offense looks like? And instead of being this like power finisher, is he like a finesse finisher? Like, is he like a guy that you like short roll and he like dazzles his way through the lane and throws these like nifty counters to get guys off balance, instead of being a guy that just like plows into people and dunks on them? Like, is that possible? Like, I don't know. Like, I've never seen a guy like that before. Where it's like your typical like Draymond mold kind of guys, or like a Kevon Looney even. It's like they're just gonna like plow through guys. So I
that's
think
kind of the story with that's kind of the story with like those smaller bigs. They're usually really, really strong, you know what I mean? And like it's not to say that Mogbo isn't, but I mean he's listed under 220 pounds, like, and that's at the combine, right?
Yeah,
so
Trace Jackson Davis like would easily defeat him in a weightlifting competition. You know what I mean? Like
he could bench press him. You know what I mean? Like, and that's important, right? That lower body strength, that lower center of gravity, the ability to get up underneath some of these big guys and really take their base away from them. Like that's an understated aspect for these small ball 5s. Now, again, like if he's a 4, he's not shooting. So like
at
to your point,
at all. Like we're talking about, again, like 0 threes. Like made 0 threes this year, which again, like there are guys that have done it and he is a late bloomer. So maybe, but we're also talking about a late bloomer who was a guard. So you would hope that like should have been in there. It's not.
Yeah, you would think so, man. And it's like, who do you compare him to type thing? I don't think there are any NBA comps that you could really like. Maybe he's a Brandon Clark type player a little bit, but even Brandon, I think, is like more strong than people really remember or give him credit for.
Mm-hmm.
So you really kind of have to have a unique system for him to fit into. And let me just ask you a question. Let's say that, Murray Boyles is in this draft still. Who would you rather have, Murray Boyles or Jonathan Mogbo?
I would rather have Murray Boyles, like solely based on age. So Brandon Clark at his combine was 207 with like a shorter wingspan. So like if you want to like buy it, like that's what you would probably go.
But he shot too at Gonzaga, and that was a little bit. He shot at Gonzaga. That was a little bit of the thought process. Like, he doesn't really shoot in the NBA, but he's, I don't know. And he was a terrific rim protector as well at Gonzaga.
That's like the other like tricky part too, is like even like TJD had like some positional size like kind of concerns where so Clark actually didn't shoot a ton at Gonzaga. So he took like half a three a game and like low percentage, but the block rate was sky high. He had an 11.3 block rate his senior year. So like that to me is the difference, where it's like we're talking about a guy who, like, even with a lack of size, was able to anchor a college defense in the WCC. And like Mogbo, I don't think is like that type of rim protector, like, at all. Like,
but Clark,
even
though low volume, he still took them and he made them,
and he came into the NBA and like was doing it for a little bit.
Exactly. Right. So I don't know. It's a tough proposition. That's why I'm not. So I see, like, in draft Twitter community, right? Like,
some people really love him. Yeah.
Really, really, really love him. And I'm just saying, I understand why people might be so hesitant. He has, like, really worked on me, though. You know what I mean? Like, through pure hard work, determination, and hustle, he's like really climbed up my board. So he's like an inevitable prospect at some point. I think he stays. Like, I would advise him to stay. I don't think you're going to get much hotter as a prospect than you are right now if you're Mogbo. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is I don't believe he portaled, so it would be going back to San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, real interesting decision ahead for him, depending on what he decides to go with.
For sure.
Yeah, still maintaining that eligibility per his initial draft announcement. Yeah, I wouldn't hate taking him in the second, but he would be a guy as a team I'd be like a little leery of giving like a guarantee or multi-year deal to. Because it, again, like size, feel, like unique play style, like there's a lot to like. I just, to your point, like the scalability is just like real scary to me. Yeah, let's do one more break and then we'll get to our final two guys. So stick with us. We'll be back on the other side. So let's do Jaxson Robinson, because this is a guy that I feel like we've talked about a lot of guys that like we kind of liked and whatever. Jaxson Robinson is a guy I'd actually say I've been lower on the consensus throughout this entire year. Like, he was a guy that, like, the name got real hot, and I watched the film and I was like, I'm just not seeing this to the same extent that a lot of people are. Real, like, guy who takes a lot of threes is the style of Jaxson Robinson. And he measured pretty well. So he measured in at, I believe, like 6'4" and 3/4 with a near 7 foot wingspan, 6'11" and a quarter wingspan. He's skinny, like he's 188, which is around like what a guy like Ben Shepherd was last year. I think Shepherd was 189 at the combine, if I'm not mistaken. So like normal-ish size for shooting guard, which I actually thought was good. I actually thought he would be lighter. He's like one of those guys like plays in a t-shirt, like gets moved around a little bit. Like, I thought he'd be lighter than he was. Looked solid in the combine games, like measured well. This is the guy who took 15 threes for 100 possessions, only made 35.4% of them. In that glut of, like, we talked about like Karaban earlier, we talked about Shireman a little bit. Like, there's this like mix of like pick your poison wing shooters, and Jaxson Robinson is another one of those guys in that class. He's a guy who could go back to school and get a huge NIL bag, especially now that his old coach is at Kentucky. What are you thinking with Jaxson Robinson at this stage?
I don't know, man. Like, I don't really want to hate on any prospect, right? But obviously, with my lead in there, people probably already picking up where I am with them. Long story short, I would like him to return. I would like him to get a little stronger, like play stronger. The size, I was actually a little bit disappointed in with the height. I mean, I know in shoots he's probably closer to that 6'6". Wingspan does him a lot of favors. I know Dirty Dancer in the comments said that he was surprised by the 6'11" wingspan because he doesn't really play that big. He plays like a guard and he's got positional size. Like you, kind of surprised by the almost 189 pounds because he looks slight out there, and he plays exclusively on the perimeter. Didn't really show me anything that I felt like I needed to move him on my board, kind of similar to Jamir. With that being said, priority undrafted free agent, maybe.
Yeah.
There might be a few other guys like, Cam Christie looking like he's staying in, doesn't do Jaxson any favors at all because Cam is, 18 years old. And you ran through the list of guys. I mean, Baylor, I'm not even a big Baylor guy, but I would take Baylor over Jaxson, right now too. I think Cam Spencer, even though he's smaller, he flew all over the court, right? Like I was really impressed with his activity amongst the, these peers that he has. Even though he didn't really have a lot of big offensive performances, was really impressed with the rebounding, the passing, team defense. I would probably take Cam Spencer over Jaxson Robinson. So if I'm in that neighborhood, if I'm Jaxson, I'm probably leaning towards coming back, but it also might be one of those things like, are you going to have the same height as a prospect next year when there are more talented wings coming in? It's tough because
it is.
Like, if he goes back, he's definitely should go big program with NIL, 100%, right? Because I based on intel too, Maxwell, I don't know what you're hearing about Jaxson. I don't hear about a lot of teams that are like clamoring or like beating down his door to get him. You know what I mean? So like, I might come back if I'm him.
Yeah, I think there was a time where he was a really hot name. Like there was a time in like January, February, like when he first started to go off. And like, just to be completely frank, like I mentioned sort of being leery of him, and like a big part of it was there was a game where like, oh, come on. Like the pop-ups on some of these basketball stats websites recently have been absolutely atrocious. I apologize for getting off course. It's been an issue. It's been a battle. He had a game that like greatly boosted his perception where he was like shooting. It was against Denver where he went like 8 for 16 from 3, and it like pulled up all of his numbers. So he was shooting like 44.4% on 8.1 per game. And then like, if you look at what he shot after that, it was like not good. Like in conference play, he took 6.3 per game and made 29.8%. So I'm not convinced he's like that type of shooter. He hit some really deep threes. But he's actually not as dynamic as you would think. And part of that could just be BYU's usage of him. But like, if you look at Ben Shepherd, again, like playoff guy, the usage of him last year, he was flying off screens. He was hitting shots in transition. He was hitting them as like a roll. Like there was all these different ways he was getting to his threes and hitting them. Right? Jaxson Robinson is largely just a guy who spots up and takes super deep threes. He's not like a horrible decision maker or anything like that, but like I believe did have a negative assist turnover ratio on the year. He's not very physically strong. His like block and steal rates are okay for like a shooter type guy. But I worry about how he's going to finish at the next level. He had assist and rebound rates under 10. Like he's just a guy where it's like, he truly is like just a shooter. And I think that like, he'll always have a level of appeal because he is a guy that can shoot from really far away and make threes. I just think like his results and like the rest of his game even is like so much farther away than a guy like Baylor Shireman or like some of these other dudes that are like in that same sort of category that like, why am I going to draft Jaxson Robinson when I could take like, if you're taking Jaxson Robinson, you're hoping that he's a better shooter than the percentages indicate. And then like, you're hoping that he figures out everything else, where it's like, I'd rather just take Dylan Jones and like, hope he figures out how to shoot. You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather just take
that's fair.
The guy that needs to fix one thing than a guy where it's like, he's got like 80 things that I need to like come into form, unless he is somehow a much better shooter than he's shown when he's supposed to be a shooter. Like I just don't really get the Jaxson Robinson thing. I think he should go back, get a big bag, get stronger, and like try to fill out the rest of that game.
Yeah, because strength is going to be one of those things where, you could apply this to every other prospect too. But like, particularly for Jaxson, you get a little bit stronger. That shores up the interior finishing. That shores up, your ability to maybe take a bump on a drive and then decide whether or not you want to pull up because you do have good touch. Maybe you can rise up for a mid-range jumper or two, and then that helps your strength helps so much aspects of your game, Maxwell. That's why you and I talk about it so much. I think that he would greatly benefit from another year in college. Again, you could apply that to every prospect that has a remaining year of college eligibility, but in particular for Jaxson, I think that go back, get better at your game. We don't care how old you are as a draft prospect here at No Ceilings, right? Like,
we just want you to be able to play in the NBA. That's all we.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another guy. This like is one of your guys, Ajayi from Pepperdine. If he does go back, he's going to go to Gonzaga. Talk about a guy that does not need to get stronger. Just a hair under 6'6", nearly 7'1" wingspan, 227.8. That is a man right there. That is not a guy who's going to come to the NBA and have a bunch of physical issues. Had a game with 14 points and 7 boards. In the second, that was his second scrimmage, I believe. And then in the first one, he was quite good also.
Didn't really score a lot, but
no,
he
but
did
he had
a lot
bunch
of the extra stuff.
Yeah. So his other game, 4 for 10 for 9 points. It was 1 for 5 from 3, but 7 boards, 4 assists, and 2 steals. He's your guy, so I'm going to kind of let you take the lead. Like, what did you see with him earlier this year that made him jump out like pretty early in this process? And then what are you thinking as far as his standing going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, Michael is no secret. I interviewed him way early on in the process, back when he was like a top 20 scorer and rebounder in all college basketball, playing for Pepperdine. Played much bigger than what he's listed as. I mean, the fact that he was under 6'6" without shoes, I was pretty blown away by. But I mean, you know, that puts him up in that 6'7", 6'8" category. Very strong. One of these late risers, had to grind his way into even high school basketball. It took him several times before he even made varsity. Then the 1 year that he makes varsity, he goes to play community college, plays there for a couple seasons. And then all of a sudden, you know, he is able to finally make a connection to the Division I side of the house with another Washington, state of Washington basketball player. Isaiah Thomas really helped him out a lot and really grew up into being like one of these, you know, really prolific scorers and rebounders in all of college basketball. The fact that he maintained eligibility and like has already kind of committed to Gonzaga should he return didn't really surprise me, especially with like the mass exodus that we saw from a lot of prospects from Pepperdine. But what he did, man, in the combine, I was incredibly proud of him. You know what I mean? Because he's high effort, high energy, high character guy too. I mean, just like salt of the world type dude. And that stuff goes a long way. He's going to interview incredibly well. He's going to really impress people. But the fact that he crashed the boards the way that he did, made the reads that he did, took shots, even though they didn't always go in, you know, he was confident in his game, and that confidence really parlayed itself into a good outing in the second scrimmage that you just mentioned, Maxwell. I kind of like the idea of him staying in, but I could also understand, especially going to Gonzaga, where their scheme is more tailored to front court players. I mean, if you look over the past several seasons, where if you are going to be featured as a front court guy in a Mark Few system, you're really going to get reps and looks. So a big part of me would be interested to see what that would look like, you know, at Gonzaga with, you know, the prospects that they already have and ones they have incoming. Just seeing him be fed by a smart coach like Mark Few, I would be really impressed to see that. But I think he seems like one of these guys to me that even if he gets his foot in the door, like even if he's not drafted but is an undrafted free agent, he's got real staying power. You know what I mean? So I kind of like the idea of him staying, but I wouldn't like knock him returning either.
Yeah, and I like great point here from D. Stephen. Like Ajayi measured almost very well for a power forward in length, combined wingspan, and standing reach, 8'10.5", and 7'1" is average for a legit power forward in the league. Like we talked about this with Isaiah Crawford after Portsmouth, where it's like, like from a pure like how tall is your head perspective, like a little shorter than you think. But you look at the measurements in their entirety, it's like actually I don't care. I actually don't care that you were a little bit shorter than I thought you were, because like from an actual like functional size standpoint, you are as big as you need to be to do the things that you will be doing on a basketball court. I thought like the passing and decision-making stuff was like super encouraging. That was my big question with him, was just like, is he a guy that's going to be a good enough decision maker to play in an NBA game anytime soon? And I actually thought he like did great on that front. And I also think like Gonzaga had not done the best, or I'm sorry, Pepperdine hadn't done like the best job of like fostering that sort of thing the last couple seasons anyway. And like, I say like the past couple seasons, even though Jai was only there for one, just because it's like, we have a history of like Max Lewis, like Houston Millette, like these guys are like not really getting a whole ton better on that front. So like, I don't know how much stock to put into that. Like generally I'm leery of guys like the shorter they are and the worse the assist to turnover ratio is. But I do wonder with him if there's maybe some more upside. The shot diet was a little weird. Like the shot diet's going to have to be different in the NBA. It's going to be a lot more threes, a lot more spotting up, a lot less mid range. but just very physically strong and very capable, and a guy that I think you could really sell your coaching staff on, like, hey, let's just give this guy a year in the G League to like figure out some of that like feel kind of stuff and just the shooting like off of spot ups and like just get him acclimated to a different role. The other thing I wonder with him is just like Gonzaga's roster construction for next year. Like Graham Ike is still going to be there. Ben Gregg is still going to be there. I love Ben Gregg. Like I think Ben Gregg's like actually a fringe NBA prospect. Steele Venters is going to be there again. Dusty Stormer is still going to be there. Stromer rather. Braden Huff is still going to be there. Like there's still a lot of guys that like are in that same sort of group positionally that like I do think there's a possibility that like maybe he doesn't play as many minutes as we might think, just based on however they end up like figuring out that crunch of like forward size guys. Like I do think there is maybe a bigger possibility that he stays in than we might realize.
And if he does go back, like I don't know how if you're Mark Few and you're probably watching him like, oh yeah, this guy's kind of like front of the line privileges right now. If he does come back, like.
Because I don't think like I'm not a Ryan Nembhard guy. So like I'm looking at that roster, and as much as I love like Ben Gregg and like some of these other guys, like I really think you're probably looking at like, all right, this guy's gonna probably need to be the focal point of where we get our scoring from.
Yeah, and I mean, we have seen Coach Few employ several big men on the court in the same time before. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is like listed as the 3, but some of these other guys kind of have like a good enough skill set to where you can get creative and where you place them all on the floor. Maybe that does open up the 3-point shooting. But again, like Michael is it's hard once you talk to him to not root for him.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to endear a lot of teams, and
I do too.
That matters. He's going to interview well. 100%. Yeah. I mean, like, it matters in every draft class, but particularly in this one, having high character guy that, is going to, he's risen to the occasion at every level that he has competed at. And, he's a hard worker. He's one of the fastest guys at Pepperdine, and any sort of like conditioning or, timed metric aspect, he's a worker, man. So, I mean, this is going to endear him to a lot of teams.
Let's do a quick lightning round on some other guys that we talked about, maybe talking about. And then like, these are the guys I think we kind of found most interesting to us just from like a philosophy standpoint. So we're going to kind of burn through some of these. You can give a quick couple sentences if you want. These are guys that have eligibility remaining. Some of them are in the portal, some of them are not. But let's do Hunter Salas first, a guy who elected not to play in the scrimmages. But has eligibility, could go back if he decides. Where do you feel like he's at coming out of this week?
I mean, the draft range is all over the place, and I think that it's going to stay that way. I would say definitely a top 45 guy. Wouldn't be surprised if there's some teams, because not just me, right? I look at other, places as well. There are other places that have first round proposition on him. I would definitely stay. Again, we keep talking about how next year's draft class is going to be quite impressive. For the juice that he has kind of on the ball, I would definitely stay in this class, knowing that worst case scenario, you're probably middle of the second round type guy. So
yeah,
that's where I'm at.
I think stay as well. I do wish he was the guy that like had played in the scrimmages, because I do think there was a chance he could have like separated himself a little bit. Neek Clifford is the next one on the list. I lean stay personally. I'm 100%. Still like, this was not a good week for Neek. Like he measured 6'5", 6'8" wingspan. Was pretty rough, like in the scrimmages. Like shots didn't go in. Had some nice plays, like had some nice defensive plays. Had a nice like dunk and
love the defense.
But like he also had like some really bad defensive lapses at times too, which like part of me wonders. Not that like I don't say this in like a negative sense, but I wondered with like him and Oso, like guys that are very much like playing a part of a system in college, like if this format might have hurt them a little bit, like where they're in a scheme that is a lot more like based on knowing your teammates and communication and things like that. Like is the combine setting just a little bit trickier for certain guys? Like I think generally we're like, oh no, high field guys like kill it in scrimmages. Like look at Jalen Williams. And it's like, I think some high field guys do. And I think other guys, like their field just manifests itself in a different way. I still like him a lot. Like I would still draft him. like possibly in the first round, depending on how the board shakes out. So like I'm still in Unique, but I could see people being lower coming out of the week. How do you feel about Clifford?
I don't know, man. Like some player types are going to benefit, some aren't. Didn't have the best of showings, but I don't see how you look at the total body of work, then look at a combine performance for him, and then be like, yeah, I don't know. I think that he's solidified himself enough to where the teams that are like him are still going to like him. I can't think of an example of a person that was like, I'm really high on him. Let's see how he does. Ooh, I don't know now. Like walking out of that, I can't see that being the case.
Sure. Mark Sears, a very contentious name. If you're a New Six Plus subscriber and you watch less mock draft, so he played in one scrimmage, was fine. Illness, day 2 didn't play. Any Mark Sears takes?
I mean, I will say that as much as like it came across like I was like the biggest Mark Sears, like what's the opposite of a truther? I guess a liar. I was the Mark Sears liar a couple days or a couple weeks ago. I could understand him being a team liking him. You know what I mean? Like, and it goes back to the fact that we've liked him for years, coming back from Ohio. But I don't know, like if he comes back, there's a lot of smoke behind the him coming back thing.
Yeah,
by the way,
I just think he's going to make so much more money going back to school. Like I think people got really excited because he was awesome in March Madness. Like, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that. He's an incredible basketball player. I just haven't really seen the NBA thing for him in a super meaningful way at any point. Again, like we knew the measurements because he measured last year, but like a guy with a sub 6'2" wingspan. He's come back even readier next year. Like nothing wrong with that.
He's not the strong guard that everyone is saying. You know what I mean? Like he's not super weak or anything.
No,
like that,
no.
But to be that size, you got to be strong, and I don't see like the NBA strength at that position. Maybe he can get there, but I don't know. Like
he wasn't getting everywhere he wanted on the court.
No, I would like to see him come back personally because I think he's one of these guys I think can help his draft stock coming back next year.
I agree.
Yeah. And could be like the ultimate backup point guard guy that you're wanting to see. I don't know. I would advise him to go back if it was me.
Yeah, just a not for me kind of guy. Ulrich Chomchi, who like was just interesting out there. Like that's the only way I can describe it. That was one interesting basketball player. I would advise like take your time, like don't be in any rush. I don't know. Anytime a guy is like an international player, I feel like I have zero understanding of how NIL works for them because I know like certain guys can't get it and certain guys can. So like if that's a factor and there's like financial stuff at stake, like I would just do whatever is best for you and your family. Just like from a pure basketball standpoint, I think he needs some time. But I also wouldn't. There have been worse decisions made than gambling on like a 6'11" guy that does really interesting stuff and can move a little bit.
I mean,
but I would say for his development, it'd be best to take his time because I think with his tools, he's going to really figure some stuff out and become quite good. So I would say go the school route or professional somewhere else, whatever you need to do.
I'm going to break the rule that you said earlier. If Bronny James is a draftable prospect this year, then or Chauncey has to be, right? Like,
yeah.
I thought that. So it's interesting that we're talking about him potentially going back. I thought he outright declared. So the fact that he can go back is like very intriguing to me. And NIL, like you mentioned, could be like, does he go NBL? I would love to see him in the NBL with the way that they kind of like run their programs and see him kind of in that Alex R style role. He hit that 1-3 in the scrimmage, and I was like, oh man, he gave people wet dreams on that one. Like that one made three is gonna boost some draft Twitter big board stocks, you know what I mean? But I would advise him to go back. Like the guy just is not ready. But we spent a whole week talking about how the fact that one prospect isn't ready but can be eventually. So why not?
Who knows? Yeah.
Why not?
Peyton Sanford at Iowa. Rough set of scrimmages for him.
Yeah.
He's a guy where like I would actually wait until the absolute last minute before making a decision, because like talking to front office people throughout the year, like I mentioned, that glut of like him, Jaxson Robinson, Shireman, Karaban, like teams do just like, I feel like every guy I talk to is like, no, this is the right order of those guys. And it's like different almost every time. I think there's a chance that he like might have real fans, like with certain front offices that are still just like, no, we buy it. He can pass, he can shoot. Like we're taking him.
Yeah.
I also like wonder if there could be some like downside to him going back, because he did shoot so well this year. That like I would really consider staying. To me, this is like almost the toughest decision on the list. Like this is like I would truly wait as long as humanly possible to make this decision if I was him. My gut says he's probably going back, I would guess.
Okay.
I would guess I don't know. That's like not based on anything, but I think like there's a real chance he gets stayed, because I just like think if you're a shooter with size and feel like you're not going to go that low, and like there's still a chance he could go like quite a bit higher than we think, based on like what I mentioned earlier with like teams just having their different preferences among those wing shooters.
Yeah, I may or may not have gotten some intel like right before the show suggesting that quote unquote no chance that he goes back to school next year.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
It's like how low are teams going to be on a 6-7 shooter? Like
the thing that you bring up though, the fact that the shot can go back. If you look at the year prior when he was the Big Ten six man of the year, he only shot like 34%. Like he wasn't beating the door down on on being a 3-point shooter, so the fact that he jumped up as high as he did in 3-point percentage, maybe that does dip a little bit. I think that he should strike while the iron is hot, but dude, watching him in those games, like he's not NBA court ready, like by any means.
He's going to take time. Yeah.
And there are people who are adamant fans of him in the back half of the first. I mean, Baylor Shireman might have outpaced him. You know what I mean? Alex Karaban is on that list too, so, and then there might be people who are like, well, Cam Christie is 18 and he's a shooter. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I would like for him to go back. I think that he would benefit greatly, because I mean, even with, like I mentioned it earlier, he had a larger role, but the usage was very similar. So he didn't really like take food out of the mouth of other people around him, but maybe he could benefit from being a little bit more selfish as a primary shooter. But I think that there are enough people, though, to circle back to the point
people
that are
like
fans of him.
Yeah,
he's probably received enough feedback to where he wants to stay.
Yep. Coleman Hawkins.
If he can go back, he should go back.
Yeah, I feel like both years I've been like, oh, like he's fine in the scrimmage. It's like every year he athletic tests horrifically, and then like he has a scrimmage game where I'm like, he's actually like, moving fine out there and like making some nice connective passes. Like I think either one is fine. I think he's probably just going to make a lot more money if he goes back to school. Like
he made bad decisions in the combine, like bad decisions.
Yeah, the one game was rough. The one game was pretty tough. The other one I thought
he entered the transfer. And he entered the transfer portal too, like before combine season, which is like, that means something.
Well, and like he was initially one of those guys that was like, I'm like going in with the intent to stay. Like I'm just doing this as a safety net thing. And then like he's been like sending like almost like thirsty tweets to fans of like different colleges after that great Osabor NIL number came out. Coleman Hawkins all of a sudden is like, hey North Carolina fans, how you guys doing? Like a lot of that.
Kerry Booth committed to Illinois, so.
Kerry Booth, Humrick House, like I feel like there's like another big there. Like there's a lot of guys like in that forward like kind of role that it would be a little awkward if he did go back.
I mean that's essentially what Kerry Booth is there for, is like to be the next Coleman Hawkins, if not better. Jalen
Wells,
go back.
I think so too. The measurements
didn't really. Measurements weren't great, didn't really stand out. I think that he will do well going back. That's the thing. It's like there's a lot of ground that he can make up compared to where he would probably go this year as an undrafted guy. That's the next year potential late first round guy to like early to mid second round, like easily. I think when mocks come out next year, if he's not declared, he will be all over them.
That's the thing. It's like we talked about like with Sanford, like Sanford was one of those guys who was in that shooting mix, but has like other stuff he can do when the shot isn't falling. And like Jalen Wells just like isn't quite there yet, but he's on such an upward trajectory that like I think the move is to like go back and get better exploring the studio space, get better passing, get better like dribbling, get better, get stronger, get better going to the rim, like all stuff he's going to be able to do in college. Like that to me is the move. Let's do a few guys that didn't play in the scrimmages. PJ Hall technically has eligibility if he wants to use it.
So we're going to do this, right? The fact that these dudes didn't play says a lot, in my opinion, right? Like, especially PJ, who has been like back half of the first round for a lot and then like gradually fell into mainstay of the second rounds.
Yep.
I think I would stay because if he's a second round lock, like the fact that he's not playing means he's a second round lock, in my opinion, right? And looking at the early portions of the second round, there's a path to playing time for a lot of those teams that could really stand to go that route. And I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes that people don't know about with him. And I would say, you're so offensively versatile and you're athletic enough to be like a competent, like weak side defender, like team defender. I don't see what he stands to gain going back.
Sure. Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. Johnny Furphy. Kansas has 8 million guys on it. So to me, it's like, you know, what's going to happen? I actually think it would be best for him to go back, which is, I know it's like a hot take because like the stock is really high. I just think from like a basketball development standpoint, I don't like how he drives. I wish he was coming in stronger. Like I wish he would go back. But I think
he measured well.
He's going to stay. There's no way he doesn't stay.
Yeah, he measured very well. Very impressed with like he plays. We talked about this when I came back and I brought him up, and Keyshawn George was another one. I would love for him to come back. There are so many people that are much higher on him than I am. Maybe there's just something wrong with me, but I would love to see him go back because he just has a lot of work to do in a lot of different areas. He's just going to be a tall shooter.
Yeah.
You know, right off the jump.
And then last one is Camp Christie, which like same exact stuff I said about Furphy, I feel about Camp Christie.
I would love for him to come back. I think that, and maybe not come back to Minnesota, but go somewhere else. He's shooting and he's got flashes in a lot of other areas. I worry about the developmental timeline with him if he does come in the NBA, but since he didn't play, I mean, that's probably telling us a lot. But hey, I want to ask you a quick question because I know that we're going to go and we just finished up the lightning round. People who have been on Draft Twitter today, or over the weekend by the time this comes out, there has been quite a to-do about the Stephon Castle. Is he not a point guard? Big to-do about this all over Twitter. I'll lead off with this, Max. Like, I don't care if he's not a point guard. Like, sure, I think, yeah. Dirty Dancers, like, I don't even love him as a secondary ball handler. I don't think that you're drafting Stephon Castle and saying he is already a good ball handler. I will say that there is a pathway for him to becoming a very good, like, weak side shot creator in the NBA, right? Like, there is a path. There are breadcrumbs that show that. And I think the people that do believe in that future aren't saying, like, today that he is a lead point guard or anything like that. I buy the proposition of him based on high school film, right? That there is some taking advantage of a scrambling defense, like a collapsing defense. There might even be some upside to where he could be even a little bit more than that. But I don't know, Maxwell. I don't know how you feel about the Stephon Castle is not a point guard conversation that's been going on over the weekend.
Yeah, I'm gonna take you on the move with me real quick for those watching on the video stream here. But yeah, I think that Castle like could be a point guard in certain lineups if everything clicks and goes right. I think my thing with him is like I'm more in the Dirty Dancer line of thinking where like I kind of like him more as like a tertiary guy. Like I like him so much more as like just an extra guy on the floor that can like make passes. And it's tough to know, like, what if this is like guys saying things to like display confidence to teams and like what guys actually believe. And if this is an opinion a player is still going to have of themselves like a year or two from now. Like, I'm not going to name names. So like there was a story a couple years ago that came out of a player that asked a team asked him like, what position do you see yourself playing? And he said shooting guard. And he is like, the guy was like definitively not a shooting guard. Like it was someone who like you would never have described as that position. That is not the position he has played at the next level. Like guys say stuff. I don't know. We're like talking about teens and like their perception of themselves and what they do on a basketball court can change pretty dramatically once they get to the NBA. Like to me, this is like I don't want to say much ado about nothing. But I don't know, like all sorts of guys describes themselves like incorrectly from a positional standpoint. I don't think he is a point guard. I think if he's like avoiding teams that have a point guard, like that's a weird choice to make. Yeah, I don't think like I think him coming into the league and like being a primary initiator out of the gate would be like probably actively bad for his development. But
I mean,
what do I
Chris
know?
Middleton was probably like the third ball handler for the Milwaukee Bucks. You know, is it so crazy to believe that he could end up being like that to where
that's I think like that's sure. Like I think like second, third guys there.
We wouldn't see Chris Middleton as like a floor general, you know, to throw a popular word out there from this weekend, right? But definitely a capable playmaker with the ball in his hand. Like that's where I would kind of say the upside for Castle is. And, you know, Chris Middleton, phenomenal guy, like several games where his playmaking had been the difference in the outcome of the game, right? And wasn't like written in a crimson marker saying that he was ever going to be that type of guy, right? But there were indicators suggesting that. I would just like to say that I think there are indicators that Stephon Castle could eventually grow into being that type of a player to kind of put that out there. I just want to be topical for a moment, Maxwell.
For sure. It's a fun discussion to have. What do you have coming out this week? Because I feel like, man, like we've had so much going on behind the scenes as far as like the amount of content that we're producing right now that I feel
like I didn't even do a show last week.
I don't even know like who's writing about what. Like I feel like in the last couple of days I've seen like 90 people in the Slack deck. I've got this ready for edit. This is done. I wrote about this guy. I'm like, there is so much happening right now. So what do you have coming out this week?
Yeah, just today I think 3 or 4 of us had already submitted our next works week in there. And yeah, we didn't even do a show last week because we were doing the mock draft reacting to the draft lottery. So this week, I am dropping a piece on Isaiah Crawford. A lot of people really like him. I am like really starting to fall true. Like shout out to Savage Garden, truly, madly, deeply in love with him. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, 4,700 words on the guy coming out this week. I've already submitted a couple of things that we have for some upcoming, you know, projects that we have coming out. Doing some video editing for some of our socials and things of that nature. I know you and I got like guest appearances that we're going to be making on other shows. We got some player interviews that we've already kind of have in the works for a couple prospects that people should be excited about. But yeah, that's what I have going on this week, man. What about you?
Nice. I've got a Kashad Johnson article that'll be out by the time most of you are listening to this on Monday morning. Kashad rocks. Like he is so fun. I like him quite a bit. I've liked him all year. Like I love like big, strong dudes that like really defend. The jumper is a question. Some of the passing field stuff is like a bit of a question, but I'm pretty optimistic about it. Real fun player to assess, like just kind of needs to figure out what his offensive role is going to be in order to stick, but a guy I like in the second round. So there's a lot to his game. I think like a lot more nuance like that needs to go into the discussion of him that hasn't, because I think people are just like big defender, maybe he shoots. And like I think he's a much more interesting player than people realize. So scouting report will be up on him tomorrow. Where can so make sure you're following No Ceilings NBA on Twitter, me on Twitter at Boundboards, Stephen at Stephen G Hoops. Subscribe to the Substack, subscribe to the podcast feed, YouTube channel, all that. Any parting words this week, Stephen?
No, just we're in the closing stretch. Like this is like the final exhale, the final push. It feels like in the next coming weeks, and I'm excited just to kind of see all the stuff that we've been pushing towards like come to fruition, man. It's been an awesome climb. Shout out to all the draft sickos in there. Everybody that's like watching us on YouTube, please hit us with that like button. It really does a lot to help us be found by other draft sickos out there. So help your fellow sickos out, right? Help make the No Ceilings universe even bigger.
Absolutely. So until next time, we'll see you all. Peace out.
Much love.